Julie Starr, welcome to the Coach's Journey podcast. It's great to have you here, and thank you for finding the time to do this conversation.
Smashing. No, my pleasure.
So we often start the podcast with, how did you find this thing that we call coaching?
Okay. Well, if I were to respond immediately to that, my first sense is that I'm not sure I did find it. I think it found me.
Oh.
And that's because I began to do it before I knew what it was. So I've been involved in the field for almost 30 years now. So when I look back at what I was doing then, I was managing projects, managing large scale change projects. I have quite a formal background of project management and consultancy, and ended up doing a lot in IT programs. And alongside that, I have always had a personal interest in learning, self-development, kind of this inquiry into how do you be happy, successful, and fulfilled. Probably born from a sense that I wasn't happy, successful, and fulfilled. So very much a kind of, how do I figure this life thing out? And also having my ladder up against lots of different walls, thinking, well, I need to do this then, or I need to do this, and then kind of looking externally rather than internally, which is always a distraction to the main trail. So I was kind of a seeker before I even realized I was just kind of trying to figure out life's problems, I guess. And I realized that the more that I was studying and learning, let me say life skills, so ways of thinking, ways of approaching situations. I was very into things like NLP and Anthony Robbins, and you might call it a kind of positive mental attitude, ability to reframe, ability to work with your own mental self-disciplines, things like that. Yeah. And as part of doing this fairly structured project management work, I started to work one-to-one with people on the teams that I was managing. So I would come in, I was external by that point. I kind of have a background in internal management consultancy, and then went to work for a smaller, like, niche management consultancy, then went out on my own and was doing this project management stuff. So I was an external going into large organizations and getting really personally invested in the teams that I was working alongside, and became known as kind of a bit of a go-to person when people had issues, like personal issues, like anxiety, or wanting to give up smoking, or wanting to lose weight, or I have to speak at a funeral I'm really nervous about. Somebody said that you might be able to help me with that. And so I found myself drawn into these situations naturally, and I wanted to. I felt a real natural persuasion to work one-to-one with people, and realized that sometimes I didn't really care very much about large scale IT projects or project management office, or what, I don't know, risk assessment grid I was supposed to have produced by Thursday. I cared a lot about the individual journeys people were having alongside these large scale change programs, where change is accelerated, pressure gets really crazy. You get into this have to situation where people's own resourcefulness and resilience is quite challenged. And, we work long hours, we work in incredibly, like, situations that when you look back now are pretty crazy. And just having those formative experiences alongside learning this information, and then realize that what I was doing was coaching.
And what was it, do you think, that was drawing people towards you? What were the practices you were already doing that you feel were helping support people, and you were resulting in you getting a name for yourself in that area?
Yeah. So I became a practitioner of NLP, and then a master practitioner of NLP, and then started to, like I say, to go on Anthony Robbins' kind of I don't know, these big crazy weekends where you walk over hot coals and shout and jump around a lot. Kind of motivational things. And I don't want to belittle that because it was great,
And when was this?
for me. Oh my goodness. Like I say, at least 25 years ago, let's say, more than that, actually, towards 30 years ago. And so NLP as a neuro-linguistic program, as a body of information, has discrete tools, techniques, processes, things you do with somebody that through that culminates in something being different. So it could be so one of the techniques is called the well-formed outcome. And the well-formed outcome is a series of questions that you put. So say somebody says, I want to be an artist, or I want to be a driving instructor, or I want to change my job, or I want to meet the person of my dream, whatever it might be. It would be a series of questions you might put somebody through. That's just one example of one tool within NLP, but it has distinct stuff you can do. So, like for when people want to give up smoking or lose weight, or it has something called a parts integration, which it's working with people's neurology and physiology to kind of shift people's persuasion to how they see a situation or how they experience the world, or it's this rich seam of information that once you start to get into it, you realize actually you're going to learn it on a course yourself. You're all working on each other. You're having these amazing moments of clarity, insight, breakthrough. It's a really great experience, but it's very synergistic with a one-to-one coaching frame, almost unhelpfully so, because you come out with a box of tricks and then you want to just go and do these to people. Okay. So there's a real danger in NLP, but generally, when people come to me and say, oh, I want to become a coach, what should I study? Or what qualified course should I go on? Quite often I'll say, look, consider picking up an NLP practitioner qualification along the way, because you will get personal development. You'll get challenged. You'll learn things about yourself. You'll start to declutter some of your unhelpful beliefs, some helpful ways of looking at things. You'll start to pick up some linguistics. There's lots of linguistics in NLP, like towards language rather than away from language. There's embedded commands. There's all sorts of stuff that's fascinating for people that like that kind of mind challenge.
Could you say, just as a sidebar, for example, towards language rather than away from language? Unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, it's worth doing. Towards language and away from language is very useful as a frame of understanding, both for yourself and the people you're working with, and in the everyday workplace or work world. Away from language is me saying, I'm fed up of having no money. I'm fed up of being broke. I don't like this job. Why does everybody else have a great job and I don't have a great job? I don't want this type of job anymore. I'm fed up of working manually. I want to work more with my brain, or I want to work. And as soon as you start to say, I want to work more with my brain, or I want to work with people, that's towards language. So towards language in a financial, for the financial, I'm fed up of being broke, fed up of not having any money at the end of every month, would be, I want free income left at the end of every month. I want additional sources of revenue. I want to feel differently about money, and I want that to be a good thing. So you're going towards what you want rather than away from what you don't want. And the important thing about that is we can get stuck in problem focus, which is, I hate my job, I hate my boss, I don't want to do this anymore. Why did I get stuck in? Why did I make the decision to do this? Which is problem state. Solution state would be, I want a job that uses my talents. I want a job where I love the people I work with. I want a job where I get to travel more or get out of the house more. I want a job where my commute is really condensed. It's no more than 15 minutes every day. that's towards language. And when you're working one-to-one with people, it's interesting where they're coming from, because often where they're coming from is this stuck state of away from language. You know, I'm fed up of being overweight, I'm fed up of being healthy, rather than, well, what do you want? What would be better? Which is all NLP type questions. What would be better than this? How would you know when you've got enough money at the end of every month? Well, because I just look at my balance and it would be like this.
And I'm already
So
hearing
that's called solution focus.
hearing the solutions focus frame,
Yeah,
hearing the importance of language and to the extent to which it creates our realities. And
completely.
yeah. And what I heard, jumping back slightly in relation to how you described NLP being something that you do to someone, like I heard it's one way of looking at it, it's a set of set pieces that you can walk people through.
It can be. It can be. It's NLP. It's a difficult field to describe, because by now, since it was first spawned by Richard Bandler and John Grinder way back in the 70s. I think John Grinder was an anthropologist, and I think Bandler was a systems thinker or something. I don't quite remember. They're both around today. And they just started to study excellence in different fields. And so, for example, one of the fields of study that they looked at was a gentleman called Milton Erickson, who they realized had mastered the art of being able to put people in a trance state just by talking to them. And what was unusual about that was this gentleman was living in a farming community in the Midwest of America. He'd had polio that had paralyzed him, even facially, to the point where he had slurred speech. He could only see the color purple. So he used to sit in a pair of purple pajamas in a wheelchair, dealing with people from farming communities, somehow managing to put people in a trance to be able to embed commands that were positive for them, or help them reframe on situations of panic or anxiety, or I don't know, deferred pain. Where so there was one story where a young man had lost a limb and was having this random pain. I forgot what they call it, this ghost pain or whatever they call it, from the
Phantom
limb that had
limb.
been severed. Phantom limb, that's it, thank you. And being able to trans that young man into a situation where that wasn't happening. And so they studied his language patterns, and they realized he was doing something very artful in the way that he structured his language, and they decoded that, which was one thing they're very good at. So an example of an embedded command might be, do you want to brush your teeth before I ask you a story, before I read you a bedtime story, or after I read you a bedtime story? The embedded command being, you are going to brush your teeth. Or it's the wisdom to know, when you're instructing somebody, it's useful to tell them what you want them to do rather than what you don't want them to do. So those motorway signs drive me crazy that say don't drink and drive, because all the mind hears is drink and drive. So they would be more useful to say stay sober. It's like saying to a child, don't run on the road. All the child hears is run on the road. You need to say to a child, stay on the pavement. It's one of those really obvious things, but we're not coded. We're not wired to do that. We tend to, we would scream at someone, stop shouting, rather than calm yourself down, be quiet. And, don't use your phone while you're driving. Oh, I need to call my mom, because that's what the brain hits. So they kind of, that's just one rabbit hole these guys went down, Bandler and Grindo. That's just one rabbit hole they went down. So it becomes a body of information that I studied it for many years and could still get fascinated with it. But at some point you have to put something down and think, okay, there's other stuff I could be learning. To come back to the original point, what brought you to coaching? That was one of those things that enabled me to work one-to-one with people, even before I realized I wanted to work one-to-one with people. Because I'd go on a NLP course, and I'd come back into the workplace and somebody would start to talk and say, I've done something we could do. Do you want to sit down with me? And do you want to have a, and then started to get these great results with people. You know, and then, and some of it was, I don't know, it seemed really graced and gifted, like somebody's, close in the family lost a young person in the family. They asked somebody to speak at the funeral. He was devastated about the loss of this young person, but he needed to hold it together at the funeral. And I'd learned eye accessing cues and physiology stuff and breathing techniques all through the NLP information, that I was able to go in a side room with him, teach him how to hold his body, teach him how to breathe, teach him where to look, teach him what, you know, some subtle embedded language commands, and had that whole thing go really well in a situation where he needed it to go well, rather than he you know, well, interestingly, so, you know, he's saying, I'm worried I'm going to fall apart, which is what the brain does. Like, don't fall apart at the funeral. Don't look like an idiot. Don't lose it. Don't, because, and then the brain codes to lose it, fall apart, look an idiot, rather than flipping into, how do you want, I want to be calm. I want to be rational. I want to feel strong and powerful. And if you were to feel strong and powerful, where would you feel that in your body? I'd feel it here. Okay, and if that feeling in your body were a color, what color would it be? It would be blue. What kind of blue? It would be bright, vivid blue. Okay, so as you imagine that bright, vivid blue color in your chest, how would you stand? I'd stand like this. And then so you just kind of code it into someone's physiology. So you can see for those like everyday bites, you know, like going for an interview, doing a big presentation, speaking at a meeting, whatever it might be, all of those like everyday foibles, anxieties, things that by the time, you know, you're 20 years in, they've fallen away as stuff you used to be concerned about, perhaps. But one of the things that accelerates them falling away as fears or foibles or insecurities is realizing the coding of the brain and thinking, okay, so I'm catastrophizing. I'm planning for disaster here because I'm planning what my mind's going to be doing if this goes really badly. What if it went really well? What would that be like? Okay, this would be like this. Okay, so go towards this. That's all I'm going to focus on. Is it's going to be great. I'm going to absolutely love it. It's going to fly. I'm going to feel like this, which sounds really like almost too easy. But when you start to study how people think that do really well, this is why they would call it the science of success sometimes, or certainly Anthony and Robin would call it the science of success, is when you ask successful people how they get that, how they're able to get up and speak to an audience of 500 people and absolutely love it. What are you thinking? I'm thinking this. How's it feeling in your body? It's feeling this. Does
Thank
that make
you.
sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And it is fascinating. And I notice I've through questions and prompts taken us down a rabbit hole deep into NLP. And this was part of your wayfinding towards coaching. So you'd begun practicing working with people on a one-to-one
Yes.
basis.
Yes.
And how did you then transition towards what we might more generally call coaching?
Yes. So I took a decision that this is what I wanted to do. And I think I rebranded my company. So there was an agent at the time that had been getting me some of the project management work. And I remember saying to him, I don't want to do this IT project management anymore. I want to do this thing called coaching. And I remember him saying to me, forget it. He said, nobody knows what coaching is. And even if they did know what it was, they're never going to pay money for it. He said, you will never make your income or your money as a coach. And it was fantastic because in that moment, I still remember 4 mica tables, styrofoam cups of tea and coffee as I was talking to him in this canteen. Completely galvanized my thinking because I knew he was wrong. And I don't know why I knew he was wrong, but I just really knew he was wrong. Like, I didn't hesitate. I knew he was wrong. Now, normally somebody, you know, he's an agent, he's out finding people like me, contractors like me work.
Yeah.
I should and would normally have listened, but something inside of me just said, no, no, you're wrong. I know, my heart knows this is my path. And then it became a matter of speaking to people, either networking or recruitment agents or people that were building projects, about the need to work with people. And for a time I was kind of straddling both. So people would kind of taking me on my CV of these, like we used to call them BPR, business process reengineering, where you just tackle this big transformation program or bring two huge corporations together or something. And people would kind of take me on of that, but where I could get into the interview and start to talk about the work that I wanted to do, the culture stuff that I'd been doing on my previous project, the one where I've been doing all the NLP and working one-to-one with people, and even starting to run small group events for people just off my own bat, kind of thinking, right, does anybody want a bit of a masterclass? We didn't even call it masterclass there. Does anybody want to learn more about this NLP stuff? And starting to do stand-up around that stuff. So it was a mixture of kind of declaring what I wanted to do, putting myself forward for the kind of people and culture type roles, but also starting to work one-to-one with people and starting to describe that to people and pitch for doing two different things. For a while, I was sort of doing both. Along that, during that time, I began to work on the idea for the coaching manual. So now I'm going back maybe 25 years ago. Started to work on the idea of, well, if I can't, because right back then there weren't many books written on coaching, and there certainly weren't coaching qualification courses you could go on or any of the construct that we look at now. And so I started to wonder, I'd always wanted to write and had always written stories and things like that as a child, and written short stories and things as a young adult. I started to think, okay, I would like to write the book that is missing, that is a kind of Haynes guide, a manual that tells people what this is, this one-to-one work, the structure of it. And here I was informed by NLP, because NLP has what's called presuppositions and operating beliefs. And so I was questioning, what are the presuppositions and the operating beliefs of a coach? That's why one of the things that the coaching manual does is look at the mindset of a coach. What does a coach think? What beliefs do they operate from? What do they intend to do in situations? So I was trying, again, a bit like Bandler and Grinder. I'm not sure I've ever thought this. I was trying to deconstruct it in order to make it available and accessible for other people. All the time doing personal development work and going on training courses. And, I was self-employed then. I was single. I basically used to spend all my spare cash on learning experiences and books. And I was just a mad reader. I didn't watch TV in those days. I was meditating. I was completely immersed in this figuring life out thing.
Yeah.
And then just sharing that.
Yeah. And did you do any coach training? Like, was there, I absolutely hear the piece around NLP and Anthony Robbins stuff, which of course is very much related, but recognizing now as we sit here in late 2023, the proliferation of coach education offer in all sorts of different ways and all sorts of different formats. Was there anything in the UK or perhaps something on conference call in the US?
To be able to do coaching or be able to learn coaching?
To be able to study a formal course?
No. I've never been on a coach training course. I've never been on one because there wasn't one.
Yeah.
I remember finding, so Miles Downey was practicing then. And I remember Miles offered a one-to-one course to teach people how to coach. And I don't think I could afford it at the time. So I kind of just dismissed it. But I did read his book, Effective Coaching. Miles is an amazing coach and he's a complete master. And later became somebody that I met and know and respect. He gave me an acknowledgement for this book, The Brilliant Coaching, and really he's a really considered gent. I also met John Whitmore. He was a mentor of mine back in the day. But apart from Miles Downey effective coaching and John Whitmore coaching for performance and coactive coaching, I think there was only 3 books that anybody knew of. Those were the 3 books, and there were no coaching courses that I could find. There just wasn't a coach qualification. You know, Miles's would have been sit with Miles and learn from Miles kind of thing.
And so slowing down on that, how I encountered you first was through a reading list on a coaching course. And so I'm a part-time faculty member with the Academy of Executive Coaching. And interestingly, the 3 books that you've just listed, other than your own, are on the reading list for the main program there, the flagship program, the practitioner diploma, which I had already begun facilitating on, and indeed am a graduate from some years ago, and was beginning to work on the coaching skills certificate, which is a 2-day, more entry-level course. And it has a reading list of 1 book, and it is the coaching manual. I've got my copy here. And that's how I first encountered you, was thinking, well, I'm facilitating on the course, I should probably read the book, and beginning to dig in. And I perhaps we'll talk about this more in a moment, but was so struck by the clarity of how you structure introducing coaching as a way of practicing one-on-one support in a written text. But tracking back briefly, because I'm fascinated by both those authors that you seem to have encountered, and you said the one-on-one stuff with Miles, who's been was a guest several episodes ago on this podcast, and was wonderful, interviewed by Robbie Swale. How did you connect with Sir John Whitmore and get to a place where he was mentoring you?
That felt very great. So I, cheeky as anything, sent him. I asked for an acknowledgement for the coaching manual, and probably because in those days he wasn't deluged because nobody else was right. You know, there wasn't a great deal of stuff written. He agreed to take a look at the manuscript, and I remember it was in the days of phone calls, when you had phone calls with people, and he agreed to have a phone call with me, and he said, he's a real gentleman, and he said, you know, he said, I picked this book up, he said, and I wanted to disagree. He said, I found myself, you know, because you have such a clear writing style, he said, I wanted to disagree with what you were saying. And he said, I've been right through it. He said, and I can't find anything that I disagree with. And he gave me the ultimate, and I think it's still on the book, he gave me the ultimate testimonial for it. He basically said, and he's got the best-selling book on the subject, and he basically said, the most comprehensive book on the practice of coaching I've come across. If anybody wishes to become a one-to-one coach and reads only 1 book about it, this could well be that book. That's how generous he was, because he was basically saying, you don't even have to read mine, just read this one.
Yeah.
And it was fantastic. And I remember we were both booked to speak at I'm sure it was some conference centre attached to a prison in London. It could have been like Wandsworth Prison or something. But anyway, I was to speak first, and I was speaking on the subject of coaching as a style of management and leadership, which is the main thrust of what I do professionally. I have a team of people that teach managers and leaders how to adopt these conversational styles and principles as a style of working and as a style of managing others. And I've got this whole conversation about that. And so I'm setting up to speak in the days where I hadn't done a great deal of public speaking on the circuit, and sat in the front row, all 6'3" of him, is Sir John Whitmore. And I'd never met him before. And I was absolutely terrified. And so I held it together and did this talk. And he came straight up to me and he said, congratulate. He was so generous. I can't explain. I don't think I've ever met anybody where he was so like heart-centered. Congratulate. That was so good. I am so delighted to have been at this. What you're saying is so needed, because he felt he felt so strongly about this whole subject. It wasn't an occupation for him. And for anybody that followed his career and where he ended up going in terms of his spirituality and the voice and the conversation he wanted to develop in organizations. He felt so strongly about the need to shift and change culture in organizations, how people speak to each other. And then we were just about to go into another set, and neither of us was really excited. It was some HR type thing that neither of us were really interested in. And he said to me, "Shall we bunk off for this and just go and get a cup of tea and have a chat?" So, oh, my day was made. It was just fantastic. So he and I bunked off for 90 minutes and had the most amazing chat, and became for and we would see each other fairly regularly for lunch or dinner if he was doing something. And I don't know, he was incredibly generous. I remember him speaking up at something, and he was asked a question, and I was down on the front row somewhere, and he said, "Actually, that's not a question for me. That's a question for Julie Starr here. She could answer. Julie, stand up and answer that question, because that's what you do." It was just, why would you give the stage to somebody else?
Yeah.
But that's who he was. He was so secure in what he did and who he was. And actually, he ended up putting a group of females together. So he was a real ambassador for, like, a champion of women in organization. And he would say, women are the future, women will make the difference. He was sort of alluding to the divine feminine before anybody, coined the term the divine feminine in regular speak. He's basically saying the men have messed it up. We need the women now in charge. And so he formed a group of about 30 of us, and it was a group that sadly sort of disbanded when John passed. But we used to get together. We all went over to France and did the whole thing where we hung out in a farmhouse. It was really great, because he wanted what he saw as influential women, or women that might be powerful, to come together. I can't even remember what he called it, but yeah, he was an incredible man.
Yeah, and I've got some sense of him on a very small level from watching couple of YouTube videos, old stuff, and hearing other people speak of him. Some of the stuff that Tim Galway said about him, and of course reading Coaching for Performance. And what I get the sense, at least, a founding figure of what coaching could be in the UK, and a profound influence, I think, on many people that have followed. And it's such a wonderful bit of reassurance to hear that serendipity was well at work, and that you have had a first-hand positive experience of him.
Yeah, completely. And I'm not sure how long it is since he passed. It must be, I don't know, maybe 8, 9, 10 years. And I can still feel him around. It's very strange. His book still outsells my book. So, and he's not even around. And I smile when it's, occasionally I'll put the word coaching into Amazon or something, and it's still there. And I think it's because it's this timeless conversation around these behaviors, and it's very heart-based, and it's very, the later editions got bigger and bigger as he started to add in the importance for kind of humanity of these behaviors. He was very interconnected, interdependent, which I think is why he was kind of selfless in his generosity to practitioners like myself that he could see were coming up and had a job to do going forward. He was very much of that whole legacy mindset in terms of what he leaves behind.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing that comes up for me in relation to that is, it somewhat does him a disservice, in my view, the reductive sense that, he's the guy that coined the grow model, because I think it was, although clearly an important part of that, he's also done so much more, and there is so much more depth to how he presents his thoughts on practice, and the importance of the heart and the spirit, and all the other things beyond the mind that are so profoundly important.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because the grow model I almost had the debate with him about I kind of did have the debate about the grow model. And I'm not going to try and quote him because that would be inappropriate. I know that what he felt about the grow model was, I'm going to be really careful because I don't want to invent something that he didn't say. If I say he knew it had its place and he knew it wasn't coaching, that's true. And if I could speak on my view on the grow model, because of that I am certain, it stabilizes on a bike. It helps somebody get their head around a generative conversation, so a towards solution conversation. It has its real limitations in that as soon as managers, especially because it's used as a quick ready tool to teach managers how to coach, if it's not explained fully and if they aren't taken through a process of understanding how it becomes stabilizers on a bike that you can let go at any point, that over time it becomes limiting. And the thing that I get frustrated about is when people think coaching is the grow model or the cigar model or any of those formulaic, convenient words. When people start to think, oh, I can coach because I can do the grow model. I know these letters and I know what, so I can coach. And of course, my team are going in often on the tail of some failed manager as coach program that's been born on, been built on these building blocks of the grow model. And then people haven't figured out for themselves how it's a way of thinking, how it's what you bring to a conversation in terms of a mindset and what you think your job is to do, how it's, there are all these underpinning beliefs and principles that enable you to create this space of a different style of conversation. And so we're often trying to unpack people, kind of undo people from the grow model and just saying, okay, put this to one side. Which is why I developed the coaching path, which is more domains of activity where you have a purpose. There's a beginning, a middle, and a completion stage to a conversation, but here we're trying to do this. Here we're trying to do this. So there's an intention. It's an intention-based activity rather than it is tick this, get this and then tick, get this and then tick, move on, move on, move on. And if I had John here, he wouldn't disagree with that. So I'm not saying he'd agree with it either. What I'm saying is, yes, him and Tim Galway put this pattern together. Yes, it absolutely broke open a conversation and helped people get their heads around doing something different in a conversation. And yes, it has its use. And at some point you have to jettison it like sandbags on a balloon, in the basket of a balloon, because it becomes an impediment to progress.
Yeah, absolutely. I wholly concur that it is a waypoint on a much larger journey, and that it is of service to no one to get stuck at that particular resting point, because there is so much more available, although that you may choose to move past it on the bigger journey. I want to take a step back to something you said a few minutes ago about beginning to put together what became the coaching manual, and really dig into like how you went about that. So just to name it, your book, The Coaching Manual, which I judge is probably the most successful books that you've written in terms of sales, is now in its 5th edition. I'm guessing here it's about 20 years old, just over.
Yeah, just over.
I'd be fascinated to learn the early stages of you beginning to collect and collate what ultimately became the 1st edition.
So I think the smartest thing I did was to get myself a writing coach. So a lady called Marcia Yudkin. And Marcia Yudkin, haven't been in contact with her since then, I don't think. She's a lady in America, and I would email her stuff. Like, here's the plan for my book. Here's the list of contents. Here's what I think it's, and so she was very, very good, very diligent, very structured about having me be intentional about what I wanted to write. So what do you want the book to do? Who is it for? She sort of made me write the CV of the book, which was incredibly useful because that helped me get the deal on the book with Pearson. So, she asked me to describe my perfect reader. She asked me to talk about the function of the book. She focused me on something called the voice of a book, which is so the mainstay of why one of the mainstays of why the coaching manual is successful, because it has this very simplistic voice that is an adult conversation that isn't theoretical or jargon. She took no prisoners in her feedback when I used to write stuff, because I was squirreling away. For anybody writing on here, you'll know the thing that you come up against the most when you're writing is yourself and your own ego, and that Jiminy Cricket on your shoulder that says you need to sound cleverer than that, or you need to say that in more fancy terms. And she just sent something back to me and say, that just sounds like consultancy speak, blah, blah, blah. I don't understand any of it, which was fantastic. I mean, I felt brutalized on the other end of this because, you kind of send it off like homework to your teacher. So she was absolutely formative in establishing the structure, which it has a real sense of a structured conversation about the topic. I had made declarations to her, things like, I don't want it to be a lot of just case studies and people talking about working in ICI or GlaxoSmithKline or whoever. I want it to be about the reader and not about me and my experiences. And so she just had me declutter the whole time, because she kept me true to my promises about what I wanted the book to be.
That's a fantastic, as a regular returner to the book, that is a central word, slightly paraphrasing, but uncluttered. That the clarity of signal and the lack of unnecessary material around it.
Yes. And she was so I might talk about this a bit later, but writing is a huge passion of mine. I'm known for being a coach, but actually I consider myself a writer first and foremost, and I write novels for young adults. So alongside of all of this, I studied creative writing. So I was going on writers' summer schools and retreats that were for writers, and to learn the craft of writing. And when you learn the craft of writing, you learn something called writing spare, which is no more, no less than what is needed in that. So, and there's something called the crystal factor. Is it the crystal ratio or something? Which is where, if you use, so basically clever's not clever in writing. If you want something to be accessible, long words, long sentences, complicated statements create this fog factor. No, it's not the crystal ratio, it's the fog factor index, but you get the crystal mark for a piece of writing that's crystal clear. It's called the fog factor index. And the fog factor index is driven by words with many syllables, longer sentences, and adding more, like layering more than one thought into a sentence. So the fact that the coaching manual by its 5th edition is honed within an inch of its life. There's a saying that I really adhere to, which is easy reading follows hard writing. And the quality of anything is in this edit, because you'll write something and then you're forced to distill it into its simplest form, which is what's called writing spare, like nothing spare.
Right.
The statement is the statement. And what having a writing coach, certainly with Marcia Yudkin, and I have writing coaches for my young adult novels, what that teaches you is to wake up to what you're writing, not what you think you're writing, but have someone say, I don't understand that. Now my editor at Pearson for many years has been Eloise Cook, and she's very good at just pointing and saying, that's not adding any value. I'm not, if there's a point you're making there, I'm not. So I think the clarity is both diligence and study and clear intention on my part, but it's also having people reflect that back at you and saying, not quite sure that's doing what you want it to do.
Yeah. Amazing. And so how long from the point of inception to creating the first edition, how long was that journey?
I don't quite remember, but I think it was quite some time. So I would think from inception to getting the deal, because these things take so much longer than you hope or you imagine. Probably an 18-month period from writing it, getting the deal, and certainly having this structured, this being taught this discipline about writing the CV for the book, being really clear about there's something called evidence of need, which is a publishing phrase that means demonstrate that people want this book, that people are seeking this kind of information. And then evidence of need is one thing, but proof of credibility, which like you're the right person to write this book. I don't know that this is all still true, but in those days, I was told by Marcio Yudkin, this is what you need to do to get a deal on a book. And I actually got 2 deals on that book. I got one from Hodder and one from Pearson, which was unheard of, but it was because I was so schooled and I was so clear. And as the time was right, it was one of those, synchronistic events where the coaching field was emergent and there was very little. I remember one publisher's review had said, this is a growing field. This is the book that's needed. If you don't sign this book, you'll regret it, which was, I was amazed at, because I just thought I was writing a book that I hope will be. And so it was timing and me having this structured background of NLP and unpacking things and wanting, aspiring to what was missing, so I think there was a genuine sentiment for me, which was, I don't want to talk about me. I don't want to impress anybody from what I'm writing. I just want to write the book that I needed when I was struggling and frustrated and couldn't find, what I needed. Yeah. So yeah, there was a lot of things came together, and I don't want anybody listening, that makes it sound like a magic trick. It's actually not such a magic trick. There's a structure and a discipline. There's a commitment, because there will be other people listening to this that perhaps want to write a book and will think, well, everything's been written. Everything hasn't been written, because the world's changing and people's needs and appetites are changing. And if you've got something to say and you think it's a genuine, authentic self-expression of your voice and your work, and you have something that you think is a contribution, then don't let the fact that there's lots of other books on the subject being written because yours hasn't. Yeah. As long as you're not corrupted by, and it's very tempting to think, oh, well, trauma's a thing, isn't it? I should write about trauma and coaching, or I should write about diversity and inclusion, or I should talk about whatever it might be, AI and coaching, because that's the thing. Because that's not where to write a book from. Don't write it from the head, write it from the heart.
Yeah. Yeah. And to what extent did the first edition being published switch you, or rather the level of your business? So the other thing I know is, probably some of my judgment coming in here too, that many people nowadays write books to make a step forward in their career, in their business, as a platform from which to get speaking gigs and more profile. And I get the sense from you, indeed it might be better framed as a question, that that's not what you were doing. It was something that felt authentically right to you. But I wonder what the outcome was as relates to your coaching business.
So I think you're being more generous towards me than perhaps is appropriate. I did write it and hope, oh, this is going to make me a coach. This is going to mean I can just get coaching work and I won't have to kind of corrupt myself by doing all this, be like better paid management consultancy type roles. And so I was saying I was as giddy as a kipper when the book came out. I was like, oh, this is going to change my life. It's going in W.H. Smith's, it's going in Waterstones, because that was the incredible thing I pulled off, was to get a job, an agreement with the biggest business book publisher in Europe. So I was cock a hoop thinking, oh, this is going to be marvelous.
Yeah, the
And
phrases, there's some amazing phrases coming out.
and of course, day one, everybody's happy, family, friends, like woohoo. And then nothing happened. Like literally nothing happened. And I remember I had this moment, and it's every author's dream. I had this moment. I walked into Waterstones in Derby. I was living in Derbyshire at the time, and there was a woman sat on a chair. They have these kind of places to have a quick look at a book. She was reading my book. She was actually reading my book, and I walked over to her and said, "Ah, oh, I wrote that book." And she looked up at me as if to say, "You're a crazy person. Why are you?" And I realized she didn't believe me. I thought, okay, then this isn't working out at all like I planned. So yeah, that was my moment. I did see someone reading my book and they didn't believe I'd written it. So no matter. So absolutely nothing happened, and I ended up doing a kind of consultancy, supporting a change program, coaching all the senior exec on a big change program for DHL over in Prague. So they were merging all their IT centers from all over Europe into one location in Prague. So I was running a team where we were doing like induction training and people work and culture work, which was what I love to do. And I was doing one-to-one training with a lot of the senior team that were key to delivering the change. And it was a big program that kept me occupied for almost 2 years. And I kind of forgot about the book because I realized actually nothing's happening with the book. So I might as well do this work that I'm loving doing, because it's coaching and it's talking about life skills. We were doing stuff on emotional maturity and all the stuff that I'd been learning and wanting to share, and getting really great results with it. So I got myself busy doing that for a couple of years. Then I kind of came back to the UK and started to get involved in other things, and realizing actually I'm getting invited to speak to some really tiny Midlands network of coaches, or it could be some group of life coaches have found the book, and they're getting it. So literally I would go and on a Tuesday or a Thursday night would go and sit in a room with 8 people that were interested in coaching, and I talk about coaching to them. And I absolutely loved it, and I still have really fond memories of kind of cutting my teeth in terms of realizing what people found useful and what was less useful, and what to take them in terms of information. And so it nothing happened, then really small things happen, and then suddenly you find yourself on stage, at some expo talking to a few hundred people, and you think, wow, that went quick, but actually it didn't.
Yeah. And I think it's a frame that shows up in so many places. So being connected to a number of coaches that are early in their journeys and leave a program, graduate successfully, and head out into the wider world to set up their businesses. And of course, it's not the case for everybody, because everybody's story is different and people have different things in their background. But the frame that you've done a thing, and how long it takes for the rest of the world to catch up with the value of that thing, and begin to pay attention, and for you to start getting people approaching you to be connected to you because of that thing, can it often be many months, if not years, which is fascinating.
And in the meantime, so it's really great that you observe that, because there is it's the kind of Buddhist non-attachment thing, isn't it? There's this thing that says chop wood, carry water. And I, when I had the book, I thought my life was going to change. I thought, oh, this is going to be amazing. I'm going to be known as a coach. It means I can go off and do coaching and nothing else. And that didn't happen. And so I just got busy chopping wood, carrying water. But it was the work I loved to do. So I was working with people. I was taking them these emotional intelligence or emotional maturity principles. I was helping them be successful. I was doing the one-to-one coaching work. I was getting busy doing what I love to do, and then suddenly it came back almost when I'd given up on it, which is the kind of Buddhist non-attachment thing.
Yeah.
It's like I just let that go and thought, okay, I wrote that book, nothing happened, no matter. I'm loving what I'm doing and having a real grand adventure doing it.
Yeah.
And then suddenly it starts to come back again. But not and this is the kind of manifestation principle, isn't it? It comes back in a way that you didn't expect because it's literally 12 man and a dog out from some East Midlands coaching. Would you mind
Yeah.
coming sitting in this tiny room somewhere off the M1 to talk about this in a travel lodge meeting room or something? Like, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So for anybody listening, like trying to because we all have these quests, these desires, these like one day maybe this could be true for me. Um, stay intentional around that. Absolutely. Don't give up your dream, and don't give up your happiness when the dream doesn't happen, because the chop wood carry water thing, joyfully, um that's all part of the journey of just not being so attached to it that you're kind of pushing it away, or it's not coming in the way I want, or I'm really annoyed about that, and you start to kind of push things away from you, that internal need for control and resistance and all that tension and frustration, and then that turns to angst, and then suddenly what should have been a good thing is now a real, brings despair every time I look at the book on the shelf. That's not going to get you where you want to be. Getting you where you want to be is put your heart into whatever you're doing, keep doing that, keep sending out that dream, and then joyfully chop wood, carry water, and see what happens.
Yeah. And the other thing I love about that is that you're standing more in your locus of control. You are staying
Yes.
centered in your
Yes.
agency and what you can do, whether it be over the next hour or the next day or the next week, rather than putting more of your focus than is helpful on this supposed magical island in the future that if I keep doing this, I'll finally get to, where you probably don't have a locus of it's well out
Yes.
with even your circle of
Completely.
influence, and
Completely.
that it may come back as a result of the journey you take, and you may find yourself standing there one day, and indeed when you do, it's probably going to look and feel and sound a lot different to what you thought it would, and your gaze will already have shifted to another magical island in the future.
Yeah.
It's a really powerful tale.
And that sounds like something that you are experiencing yourself or have experienced yourself.
I think to an extent, yeah. I mean, much earlier in my career, probably almost in a previous life when I was a professional musician, it was always about getting to the next level and another
Yeah.
gig. And of course, when you do, that's wonderful, and the pressure is higher and the expectation is greater and the conditions are different and so forth. And I think as probably 99.9% of coaches out there, my private practice isn't as strong and robust as I would like it to be. And I hope some of the work I've done on myself and the practice over the last couple of years certainly has got me more centered in a place of, and that's okay because it's exactly where it is right now. And
Yeah.
I keep
Yeah.
chopping wood and carrying water and showing up to
Yeah.
every client as fully as I possibly can, and realizing that regardless of what I might think about their circumstances or how they've come to me, they are the most important client and they're the person that I need to be serving as best I can in that moment, with the
Yes.
acceptance that that may lead to the biggest piece of work I ever get, or it may lead to them
Yes.
having minor change in their life, and indeed a million things in between. And that those, like I can essentially have a very low level of control over the outcome, but I can absolutely support what's happening before me and what I'm involved in.
And listening to you say that, it causes me to think sometimes. So back in the day, there wasn't a career structure for an executive coach for me to point at and say, I want that ladder. I want to be on that ladder, and there's the rungs on that ladder, and the rungs are this much per hour, this much per hour, this level of individual, this type of organization. And so it could be a bit more creatively chaotic, let's say.
Yeah.
And I could be a bit more intentional about, I just want to speak truth to power. I want to influence the influencers. That's kind of how I had it. I want to influence the influencers. And I like to travel. I love to travel. I like to get myself in exciting situations. And so that was driven from that. When I hear you talk, you've kind of got all of these kind of pathfinders in front of you that's kind of carved out this route that says success looks in the coaching field looks like this. I think it's useful to keep throwing that away, because what I have found is, as soon as you get fixed in what it should look like, that starts to constrain possibility. And so, for example, I don't just coach. As I've said, I consider myself a writer, but I have a short portfolio of people that I work one-to-one with, and all those people are in very interesting situations. It's a complete privilege to be operating at that level in organizations, and yet I don't want to grow that list any longer. I have a training team of people that go into organizations and teach managers and leaders how to coach. So we've unpacked, that's what this book is about. It's a much shorter read for the busy manager that hasn't got time to become a coach and doesn't want to become a coach.
Yeah.
They just want to, use these conversational skills in everyday
So for those
interactions.
that are audio only, that's brilliant coaching.
Sorry, yes, this is brilliant coaching. So the coaching manual is obviously the first one. Brilliant Coaching is my second book. That's now in its 4th edition. And the mentoring manual is the sort of companion to the coaching manual. So the mentoring manual is now the #1 book in the UK on the subject. So that's really taken off. And I think it's because it does the same job as coaching, and it's doing it at a time when organizations are looking more at workplace mentoring as a kind of low cost or no cost intervention to support people to learn and grow and develop. What was I saying? So I'm doing lots of different things, and I'm also writing creatively. And so my actual career is quite idiosyncratic. It doesn't actually look like probably what anybody else is doing. And in that, you can be self-determining. I think this is the lovely thing about doing this one-to-one work with this heart intention that says, I'm driven by a real clear sense of purpose to support people to grow and learn myself, and to share that growth and learning with others, and let that be my contribution, my love express in the world, if you like. And then let that take whatever form it might be, because you interviewing people on podcasts is as much a contribution to the coaching field as writing the next best thing or doing the next best piece on the speaking circuit, or the best workshop, or the best training course, or the best whatever it might be. And so you have to look at yourself, I think, yes, be informed, perhaps inspired by possibility, what you're seeing shape, the world you're seeing shaping around you, but navigating all the time by your own breadcrumbs that are saying, actually, my individual path seems to have me going in this direction, and stay true to that. Because I think there's a real danger that and this is what I mean about having my ladder up against everybody else's wall. You end up with climbing a ladder, but it's against somebody else's wall, and you get fairly high up it, and then think, why is this not joyful? Why does this not feel like it should have felt when I was planning to do this 5 or 10 years ago? And it's because it's not your ladder, and it's not your wall, and you're supposed to, and it could be for anybody listening, you're supposed to do this as part of something else, and your contribution is more in this sector or with this community or in this type of situation. It's really classic for people to almost want to rub themselves out and draw themselves again when they become a coach, whatever
Mm,
that means.
yeah.
And so they lose everything. I used to be this amazing recruitment consultant, or I used to be this amazing school teacher, or I used to be this amazing whatever it is. But now I need to be a coach. And I've seen coaches, I met coaches, they're all like this, and so I need to be more like that. It's just it Yeah, it's sad where people end up from that, because this the idea of throwing the baby out with the bathwater literally becomes this fatal mistake,
Yeah.
which is you had this territory of the NHS and nursing or the medical profession, or you had this territory of education or the military or whatever it is, what your background, and you threw away the whole rich experience of the military for the last 20 years to try and get into investment banking because you met lots of people that were doing that and you thought that was where the money was or the prestige was or the
Yeah.
and you
Yeah.
could have been dealing with PTSD and military, because that's what it's like. Life's got a plan for you. You might have one, but if you can find the one life's got for you, it's all going to go a lot more smoothly.
Yeah. And that taking that last point as a jumping off point to talk about, because I really heard going way back to much earlier in our conversation, your piece around coaching found you, and that um, there was a plan happening as you moved forward and kept staying connected to what your heart was telling you. As the outcome of the book was you were gaining more and more traction, what were the big rungs on the ladder between, well, over the last 20 years? Where has it taken you as you've grown your business and developed your career?
I think the major decision I made early on, which I got a lot of criticism, disagreement with, that I had to let go of, was I'd written the coaching manual, which would have set me up nicely to teach coaches how to coach.
Hmm.
And I chose not to do that. And my friend is Kim Morgan that runs Barefoot Coaching. I know she's also been a guest on
Previous
this
guest,
show.
yeah.
Yeah, she's an amazing lady. And I love her to bits. And she does a really great job of doing that. And the coaching manual, if I wanted some credibility in order to do that, would have set me up very nicely to start to run open training courses to teach coaches how to coach. Um, as I'd already said, my background was business, change management, working with developing leadership and mindset and emotional maturity and emotional intelligence in organizations. And the big decision I took was to stay within the framework of large organizations. So to stay B2B rather than go B2C. So, business to business rather than business to customer. Um, so I chose to um, set up as a provider of coach training to managers and leaders within the context of a manager role. Because for me, I believe, and it wasn't always the most lucrative thing I could have done, for me, I believe that's where the future of coaching lies. That's where the possibility of these conversational skills, this mindset, this acumen that we acquire when we learn to coach, that's where the most traction is. That's where the real opportunity and the real need is in the world.
Mm.
I know that's a big statement, but um, what the coaching field has done very artfully, and I've possibly helped with this, is they've wrapped and packaged these beliefs, these behaviors, like great listening, like effective questioning, like the ability to give great feedback, like the ability to build rapport and trust and openness, like the ability to flex the style of our influence in a conversation from being more directive to less directive, to facilitate somebody else's thoughts, to help somebody think and act for themselves. What the coaching profession has done very elegantly is to wrap and package that and call that coaching. And obviously that's a made up term. It's not, so coaching isn't archetypal in the way that mentoring is archetypal. We could talk about that separately.
Mm.
Coaching is a bundle of ideas, a bundle of behaviors, a bundle of abilities, skills. And if you want to put NLP into that frame, you really start to create a formulaic approach to it. But coaching is a bundle of ideas that have been wrapped and packaged and then badged, branded as coaching. And then you've got qualifications in it. Then you've got competency frameworks in it. Then you've got, you know, laws and rules and regulations around it. But actually, this is it is all born from the truth of our interdependency. And this is why coaching will never go out of fashion. People used to talk to me in the days when I was first setting up. People would say, "Oh, it's a fad, it's a fashion, it's like BS 5750, or it's like TQM, or it's like whatever the circles were. I can't remember what the circles were, but
Wow,
anyway, all of
what
those."
are those? Say more about the BS 5750 and TQM. What were those?
Total quality TQM was total quality management. So back in the day, TQM was everything because it was a standard, and there'll be a kite mark for BS 5750. You know, it's all of those things that come in like BPR, business process redesign, was a thing. You know, it was a management consultancy thing, like agile.
Okay.
Don't want to say too much about agile, but agile is a thing.
Yeah.
You know, it's like the waterfall method
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
software development. It's a thing. And people are saying to me, this coaching, it's a fad, it's a fashion, it's a thing. The reason why it's not a fad or a fashion and it's not going anywhere, hopefully it might just ameliorate into human behavior as a way that humans are with each other. The reason why it's not a fad or a fashion in quite the same way is because it's born from this sense of connection and interdependency, and how when we support each other, and this is what Sir John Whitmore knew, when we support each other to be great, when we adopt a mindset that says, I want you to be successful, I want the best for you, and he was a living embodiment of it. This generosity of spirit towards somebody else that says, I love it when you thrive. I see the potential of you, and I see the possibility of this, and I want to facilitate that in some way, not in an egoic way, because that's a trap, but just I love it, and this is why, once people get on this coaching training thing, that they want to become a coach and nothing else, which again is a trap. But
Mm.
this is why coaching isn't going anywhere. And this is also why I took the decision, actually, from what I've seen over the past however many years in organizations, I know that these behaviors are formative when placed in a management and leadership role. So all the problems that when we talk about low engagement, when we talk about the war for talent, when we talk about disenfranchised, disconnected, everything that we saw during coaching, during COVID, how do we've got all these remote teams, coaching, because coaching skills facilitate connection, understanding, constructive challenge. So I think, in terms of formative decisions that pointed me in a direction that wasn't always a happy trail to furrow, to plow, that was the decision that changed my direction, I think, was to commit to that.
Yeah. And how did you, like, I have a sense of how it could be done, but I'm fascinated to know how you built from the early days into having, like, what I understand to be uh, a mid-scale company that is doing this in a number of organizations simultaneously. What was that process like?
Gosh, now you're testing my memory. I remember one of the first people that employed us to do, because we started to do it as, and this is still true. Sometimes you have to reduce the word coaching and replace it with what the organization is looking to do. So let the coaching be the how behind the what they already want to do. And of course, managing performance is something that certainly in my early career was a lot about what people want to do. So people have performance management life cycles, and what we were able to do very easily was make those links to the performance management conversations. So those twice, three times yearly conversations that people had with their managers. And we were able to do a skills training that would support not only you know, those review conversations of performance, but also tackling the tougher conversations of constructive feedback,
Mm.
or even disciplinary type situations. And we were able um, to make those links and enable managers to have conversations that where they are able to deal with difficult issues or situations of non-performance, or trying to raise people's levels of engagement, and get people off the stands and on the pitch in the conversation. So rather than having this kind of dictatorial style of conversation where I just as your manager, I download all my thoughts to you, and then hopefully you pick them up and run them. And I have this swell of pride because I think I've imparted my 40 years of wisdom to this young person, rather than that actually I'm taught to facilitate and help you think and act for yourself. So I remember in the early days, what we would just, and we still do this, to be honest, we position coach training, coach development into the what and the why that somebody already has. And that could be raising engagement levels, it could be moving to a matrix management structure, it could be running virtual teams. We're always able to display how these more artful, elegant, resourceful, and resilient conversational skills that underpin coaching can help in those situations. Because this old model of I tell you do, or I instruct you comply, or I know you don't,
Mm.
that's what always needs to fall away. And that issue is a continuous issue. It's a we're getting better. So we spend less time. So now that the whole field is more mature in its understanding, like back in the early days, we would literally have to explain to people what we meant by coaching and what we wanted to go and train people to do. Now we have much more mature clients that come to us knowing what coaching
Mm.
can do, and asking us to compete against other providers that are going to do something similar. So it's a much more sophisticated, mature, aware, savvy buyer. Um, I say that sometimes that I find that frustrating, that people often want quick and they want cheap. And of course we can give you we'll say to them, okay, we'll do this, and then there'll be an integration, and then we'll come back in, we'll do this, and then we'll work with them this way. And they'll say, okay, can you do it in half a day? So
Yeah,
I think that's an age old problem that a lot of a lot of providers in this space will recognize.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
um so yeah, that's the game, that's the ongoing challenge, the ongoing game. And all we've got is more sophisticated about how we do it. We have this principle called bonsai, and like a lot of people during COVID, we went online. We built this online learning platform called LearnStar, which is a very sophisticated learning platform that has lots of rich resources and things on it. Also has a lot of free to
Mm.
download stuff if people want to have a look at that. So whilst the technology has evolved, perhaps some of the adept ways we've learned to do it has evolved. Writing the book certainly helped, because that brilliant coaching has certainly helped, because that gives us a text to work alongside with people. But yeah, that's the evolutionary journey, and it's a horse I'm on and I backed, and I'm not going to switch and start training coaches how to
Yeah,
coach anytime soon.
yeah,
Certainly.
yeah. And we'll definitely link to LearnStar in the show notes for the episode. And alongside this, to what extent did your one-to-one practice, so working with senior leaders, cross-pollinate with the work you're doing going into organizations and training leaders and managers? Was it the same companies, two different streams of work, or?
Um, it becomes two different streams of work, really. Um, I no longer go into organizations and train coaching. I have a very talented team of people that do that, and they've all been with me 15 years plus, um, some of them 20 years plus. And if if there is a need spotted for perhaps some exec coaching, perhaps we've got senior leaders in the room, perhaps somebody steps forward and says, is that I don't tend to get involved with any of that. So that tends to be something on its own. I might go in where we've done something where we've gone through a whole organization and trained a lot of managers in this, because people are really, the client is really committed to making a step change in the nature of everyday conversations. How would the culture be much more supportive towards performance and engagement and results? I might go in and do some kind of masterclass, perhaps around a specialized topic like the ego in coaching and how that affects our ability to coach, or coaching and the link to engagement, or coaching and the link to emotional maturity and emotional intelligence. But generally, that business, I support my team to run that business. So I provide the materials, the models. We've got very sophisticated ways of discussing and unpacking that. We've got something called the stepping stones model that helps somebody come from directive to less directive, to say it's not just tell or ask. There are various behaviors that sit along this scale of flexibility, like giving a summary or making an observation or giving advice, that are more or less directive. And all of those models and those principles and ideas are born from, just working on the ground with managers and realizing they need a different, they don't want to be a coach. They don't want the philosophy or how good it is or how lovely you'll feel when you do it. They want the hints, the tips, the tricks. What do I stop doing? What do I start doing?
Yeah.
Give me a way of thinking about that gives me easy, fast access. And so that's the work I'm doing behind what's going on. And indeed, I've got a team day in London this week to sit with the team, and we'll be going over stuff. We have this principle called bonsai, which is we nip and tuck things.
Yeah.
What's needed? What does the client need? We now get much smarter around doing pre-work and integration support and all those good things that we've learned to do over the years.
Yeah. And so it sounds like your one-to-one coaching practice sits in a separate part of the
It
business, and
does. Yeah,
it's
yeah, it does.
yeah.
It does.
And I wonder around money, and one of the things that comes up so frequently for coaches at all different levels of their journey in terms of business, how you have thought about money as a business owner, and particularly in relation to your one-to-one practice, and whether that's or the ways in which that might have evolved and shifted over the time that you've been practicing.
Yes. Glad you bring up money, because it's a fantastic subject and we don't talk about it enough. Um, Back in the early days, one of my, like, how do I be happy, fulfilled, and successful? One of those things was, and how do I make loads of money, and how am
Mm.
I a millionaire before I'm 40, and all that good stuff. Gosh, a million's not even much money these days, is it? Um, so money was always a big part of my aspiration in terms of um, these are the results I want to see. This is what I expect to see. And and so when you start on the one to and so when I was working as a project manager, an external that would go in on situations, or a contractor, consultant, whatever you might call it, that was all determined by day rate. So we used to compete with each other on day rate. So what's your day rate? Is it 250? Is it 550? Is it 1,000? Then you'd meet someone that was learning, earning back in the day £2,000 a day, and you think, oh, you've just blown my mind. Because and then I remember hearing that Anthony Robbins charged people to sign up to be coached by Anthony Robbins. You had to put $1 million down, or he wouldn't even take your call. and things like that used to blow my mind. So it's a great subject, because what you realize, and somebody told me this really early on, and it's true, or it has become true for me, which is money's not real.
Mm.
And that's not helpful for anybody. So there will be people sat thinking, well, you might say that, but you don't have my bills and my mortgage and my whatever
Mm.
debt or whatever. And yet, when you go and study this subject specifically, and that there were certainly lots of books on my shelf about this, um, and I probably went on courses about, I can't remember, but I will have attended a day event on manifesting abundance or something. Um, what you start to realize, and I think this is borne out by some research, but I'm sorry I can't reference it adequately, is what you realize is there is a direct correlation between what you think you're worth and how much money you earn. And practically, that comes out with your ability to ask for money, your ability to sound like you're worth that money, and your ability to be comfortable with it once you start earning it. And I
Mm.
have seen all of those things go really wonky for people. And I remember somebody back in the day, I was hiring some trainers for something, and somebody came to network because he wanted some work, and we had a pleasant chat, and I said, okay, so if I were to hire you for a day's training, what's your day rate? And he paused and took a, like, physically took a gulp in front of me and said, um, £350 a day. And then I kept quiet, and then he said, but I really want to work with you. So I mean, I would take 250 if that was okay. And I kept quiet. And he said, oh, less than that, really. I mean, you could just tell me. And I mean, bless this guy. It was like a masterclass in how not to ask for money.
Mhm.
Because, well, back in the day, that £350 was not a great deal of money to, like, for the job I was hiring, it was worth twice that. The job that I was hiring was worth twice that. And so his first number was just a random number to him. That he felt was a lot of money. And because I stepped quiet and he was continuing, the figure just went down and down. So God bless him. And I didn't hire him because I was so uncomfortable with his lack of self-regard, self-esteem. Because
Mm.
if he didn't think he was worth anything, he's probably not very good at what he did, and he
Mm.
probably knew that. He
Mm.
probably was just starting out, and so this gap of incongruence. There has to be
Yeah.
some congruence between what you feel the job is worth, what you feel you're worth, what you would be comfortable with, what you'd be uncomfortable with, what you'd be delighted with, but not amazed by. So there's a saying, put your basket out far enough so that when you shoot basket with the ball, you're trying to get the ball in the basket, that you've got a chance of getting it, not so far out that it's going to, so if you hear, and this is where people get confused, because they might hear a coach saying, oh yeah, I earn so and so earns £1,000 an hour, and you think, oh great, that's amazing. I'm only
Mm.
charging £150 an hour, so I need to up my rates. Well, don't go after £1,000 an hour, because it not from £150 an hour, because you're unlikely to embody £1,000 an hour. And if you do, you will probably catastrophize yourself into failure so much, because you'll get in front of somebody that's paying £1,000 an hour, quite serious about that whole situation.
Yeah.
And then you'll start to feel anxious or upset, or, so that there's a personal sense, there's a personal matching. There are a few tips and tricks that I'll cover about how to ask for money, but the most important thing about asking for money is be really comfortable, get behind your number, and stay embodied behind that
Yeah.
number, and let the number be the number. Um, so one of the tips I would give people about asking for money is the reverse of what that lovely young man did to me that day. Is not to say the number and let it drop like a brick into a pond, like with a stony silence afterwards, because functionally, all that does is create this chasm in the conversation. So if if you wanted to earn £500 an hour, you felt it was a senior level of management in a mid-sized organization, you're thinking, okay, this has got to be £500 an hour. Then don't just say it's £500 an hour and then leave a stony silence. You would place the number in the conversation elegantly so that it wasn't the most important consideration by the person hearing it, and they didn't interpret from you that it was the most important consideration for you. So what I mean by that is, you might say, okay, so it sounds like you might be the kind of coach you're looking for. What are your fees? What are your costs? And you say, well, I tend to charge per assignment. A typical assignment would be 12 hours to be spread normally over six sessions of 2 hours each. The cost per hour works out at around £500 an hour, but that also includes email conversations between the sessions, so I'm available. I'm really happy to take the odd call. I'll also do some profiling up front. That's included. What's not included in that is any travel if you want me to come in on site. So you can see,
Yeah.
the £500 an hour goes into an elegant conversation around the structure, how you work, what they can expect, what you'll expect from them, what they can expect from you. And what I hope you would hear is, I'm really comfortable about all of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, if I'd said, even if I'd put £2,000 an hour and I didn't think I was worth it, and I'm not saying that anybody isn't worth it, somebody's worth it. It's still going to set up such a wobble with me, and it's going to be distracting to my mind that I'm going to keep wanting to chew back over it. And in this dog-like communication that we have with each other, you're probably likely to pick up on that and say,
Mm.
can we just go back to this rate, because it sounds a lot higher than anybody else is talking about.
Yeah, right. And
Does that make sense?
it absolutely does. And I hear that there is a collection of energies around it that are so important with the way in which you present it and hold yourself alongside it, how you support
Yes.
it. Not and of
Yes.
course, the awareness that it's possible to say it in a process of negotiation, and if that does land and you move forward into the engagement, that you and there was, for whatever reason, you've moved past the negotiation in inverted commas successfully and the number has been accepted, but you're uncomfortable with it.
Yes.
It's highly likely that you're going to keep bumping into it each session in
Yes.
one way or another,
Completely.
and it's in the system.
Completely. Completely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And is that, like, it sounds like, or I imagine that's been an evolution for you across the course of your career. And certainly my experience has been that it becomes more comfortable to talk about money generally, and that
Yes.
if the figures are going up somewhat incrementally, there's not an enormous leap. That also leads to the level of comfort.
Yes. Yes.
I wonder what other things there are that's useful to say about money.
So it's important to know your value. So it's important to be able to connect the input to the output, and it's not always it's not always straightforward to do. In order to get yourself comfortable, you have to be able. So, just to state the obvious, as when I first began coaching, I began with fairly junior managers, say working in a call. I remember working in one call center situation. So fairly junior managers running teams in call centers. And that has a value because those call center managers have a value because of the work that they're doing. And then you go to their bosses, middle management tier, then you get upper middle management, the senior management, and then you might get to, I don't know, head of department, and then you might get to, executives. And the rates you would expect, determined by the scale of the operation, the organization, and also sometimes the nature of the organization. So the NHS is a huge institution, but it doesn't pay as well as professional services, law firms, things like that. So there's something determined by sector, something determined by level, and something determined by scale of organization, that would say there's a probable escalation in rates. The success of my career, as I watch it, I have gone up those levels. And so I recognized when I needed to say no to an assignment because it was a too junior a situation, and start to give it to my team.
Okay.
Because and be willing to give up work to do that. But that's a whole other thing, because backing yourself sometimes means putting yourself out of work. And I did that in the early days. I said no to project management stuff to sit at home with a mortgage and bills and all those good things, waiting, thinking, I'm going to spend my savings before I go back to doing the thing I don't want to do. So sometimes you have to kind of back yourself a little bit, and not be foolhardy, and be willing to make money and go and, chop wood, carry water. So there is a natural ladder that you go up, and it's just as you said, there are logical increments. But by now, my rates are very personal to me and very personal to situations, and because I have such a short list of 5 or 6 people that I'm coaching at any one time, because I'm doing all these other things, and I have the luxury of that. I've gone from coaching 20 people at a time, which is completely mind blowing, but I don't know how I survived it, and it was a lot of in-person stuff, because I've worked hard to make things easy. I have the luxury of choice a little bit more, but I still have made resonant decisions all the way up, which is I won't accept something that is worth less than the value I think I can add and am adding, and I need to feel good about the number. Just to complete the point about, sometimes we get so fixed on the number and the per hour that we forget the impact. So where you're working with somebody that earns 80, 90, 100,000 pounds a year, you can guarantee they have a span of influence in the organization that is likely to impact millions of pounds. And the more you practice and the more you're in practice, and the more you realize and do kind of post assignment reviews, or have somebody else review, or get feedback, or whatever the mechanism might be, once you start to realize how somebody has restructured a department, how they made a different kind of hire, how they took a different turn, how they decided to do so. There's a great question you can ask somebody in a questionnaire following an assignment, which is, what has happened that wouldn't have happened were it not for the coaching intervention? And that's when the interesting things, which is, I decided to double the size of the operation, or I decided to stop doing this much. I decided to stop doing all of this activity and focus on this. And then what's the benefit of that has been this. Then you start to realize the net worth in terms of revenue of effective coaching within organizations is huge. And also the mistakes and the screw ups that people avoid, the arguments, the conflicts, the disenfranchised situations that get healed, it's literally worth millions. And I can't, I can't point at research that says that, but my experience says this stuff's always worth hundreds of thousands of pounds. It's often worth millions. So when it's the difference between 500, 750, £1,000 to £2,000 an hour, actually, when you know what you do and you've seen what you do, it means you show up knowing the impact of what seems like just a conversation that's not just a conversation.
Yeah. And I know it's, for me, what comes up as a parallel to that frame we were talking about earlier, particularly for coaches that maybe have less experience around the value of you going through that cycle multiple times, so you get a sense of the network effect of the intervention, and you can then more consistently and congruently stand behind the figure with confidence, thinking, well, I've literally seen and heard it play out, the impact that
Yes.
that sound coaching practice can have across different layers of an organization, particularly if, like you're able to continue to move up the levels of seniority within organizations, because understandably those people have greater influence over what's happening in the wider company.
Yes.
It's really fascinating. I want to take a, not a left turn, but like I've heard you say in some of the research that I've done for our conversation today, something along the line. So I'm going to paraphrase and hopefully not butcher it too badly, but that showing up fully as a coach is the expression of yourself in service, or something along those lines. And well, let me pause there and check that I've not just made something up.
I have a principle, which is the biggest challenge we have as coaches is to get ourselves out of the way in a coaching conversation. I suspect you're pointing at is the need that so one, the person that benefits from you being a coach the most is you, because of the journey you have to go on to become a coach.
Yeah.
So to become a really great coach, the journey you have to go on is self-inquiry, dealing with your own foibles, insecurities, limiting beliefs. You have to get healthy, stay healthy. You have to show up in a professional, disciplined way. You have to follow your own principles. When you're trying to coach somebody to be their best or be emotionally mature about a situation, you've got to learn emotional maturity yourself. You've got to deal with your own inner conflict, outer conflict. So the thing that fuels my expression as a coach is the person that has traveled that journey, which I suspect is what you're pointing at in terms of a quote.
Yeah.
So the thing that informs my coaching in terms of what I bring to it is my own journey, my own path of self-inquiry, my own path of study and learning, my own path of decluttering me, like the letting go, the the getting rid of chips on shoulders, insecurities, false boundaries, limitations, any imposter syndrome, all of that work you have to do.
Yeah.
Kim Morgan's really good on this in Barefoot, because she comes from a therapeutic background. All of that work that you do to be able to show up cleanly in the room and create a conversation of possibility, create that space of listening that isn't about you. This is what I mean about getting yourself out of the way, to show up for somebody, to create the energetic connection of the conversation and hold that and have somebody trust you, be open with you, be willing to venture further in a conversation than perhaps they would with most people, because they sense a climate of trust and a climate of safety. That's the work that we have to do to show up. And that's probably what you're pointing to, is to show up as that self-expression, but let that be somebody that's done, that's done
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
decluttering along the way.
And I wonder if you might speak to some of the practices that have supported you in that have been effective in your decluttering and becoming whole, in order that you can hold that central trust and groundedness and stability.
Yes, and with the proviso that it's a journey that continues. I can kind of point back and go, oh, I did that and I did that and I did that. But it, there's when you're on this path, you realize it's just, there's always another layer. There's always another door of inquiry opening. So I mentioned things like NLP and I also mentioned meditation in the past. So I did meditate before it was something that you could say out loud. I've always been a bit of a bit alternative, let's say. It's funny how things come around.
Mm.
Even things like yoga back in the day, or doing meditation, or I remember studying self hypnosis, and I used to tell people I was just going on a yoga weekend or something, when I was actually going to do something quite alternative. And there's all things now that have become more normal. But so I have had this path of inquiry and going on lots of weird and wonderful stuff, and the conventional to the less conventional. So success stuff like the Anthony Robbins, or business thinking, or all that kind of how to be successful type stuff. But also things like the Institute of Self-Actualization, ISA, back in the day, which was quite tough, kind of therapeutic type interventions. um, I did a lot with somebody called an organization called Landmark Forum.
I know.
Did all of their curriculum,
Yeah.
both here and in the States. um, I have studied a lot with a mentor and friend, Brandon Bays, that she developed a process called the journey, which is an emotional
Yes.
processing technique. So it's an emotional processing technique that I have, witnessed a lot, experienced a lot myself, and done hundreds and hundreds of journey processes with other people. But it again, it's because it sort of comes from a base of NLP, in terms of dealing with physiology, dealing with how stored emotions are repressed, repressed emotions are stored within the body. So I must have done 12, 13, 14 years of stuff with Brandon Bays and the journey. Um, Alongside her organization, I began going to India a lot, kind of 10 years ago. So I must have been to India. Obviously, we had the lost years of COVID, but
Mm.
before, I was going regularly for the previous 8 years. I'm going back again in February for 3 months, for 3 weeks. So doing things like, I don't know, bathing in the Ganges, meditating in caves, I'm going to stay in an ashram that I love down in Kerala. Um, so working with the mind and the Maya and the illusory nature of self. I've also more recently started doing stuff with Joe Dispenza, that you've probably heard of. So I did his week long. He's the neuroscientist that works a lot with the mind body connection. Um, he's neuroscience and epigenetics. So I go on these kind of weird and wonderful experiences, and then bring stuff back into my work and my writing. In the books, there's stuff about the ego in there. A lot of the presuppositions come from working with the mind. um, and 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 it's the joy behind all of the work I do. It's a very personal journey, and I would encourage anybody to follow their own breadcrumbs in this way. To find the things that switches them on. And if you're interested in working with trauma, or you're interested in working with um, financial abundance, or whatever it might be, learn and then teach. That's the kind of way it happens, isn't it? We teach what we most need to learn.
Yeah. And I'm interested in like your journey of self-inquiry and the personal nature of that, and how you've followed your own breadcrumbs or energy, and done things before they were more widely accepted as stuff that people do. And like that you have also, from what you've said in our conversation so far today, largely focused on individuals, but within organizations, as
Mm,
opposed to personal coaching. And I wonder if
mm.
that's ever been part of your practice, or there's a reason that you've not kind of ventured in that direction.
It's not anything I've ever really wanted to do. And partly that's a financial situation. So when organizations pay for coaching, the rates are a lot higher. Um, and my context is business, and that's where I'm comfortable. and I understand an orientation to that. It isn't that, I mean, I mentor people outside of business. I might gift, if somebody's did it recently in the village, somebody's son's out of university, doesn't know which way to go. I'll gift somebody a coaching session to say, let's do a profile. Let's because that's enjoyable, but it's not what I do for a living. It doesn't end up going in that direction. And the contradiction is that I would be able to speak a lot more openly about the kind of spiritual elements to what I do personally on my own journey, and some of the weird and wonderful, the more kind of woo woo stuff that you end up realizing around the nature of reality and the mystical, um and how we interact with this. You would be able to have much more interesting conversations perhaps. But what's interesting is, and it is a bit like me meditating way back when I couldn't kind of be open about stuff like that. um what's interesting is noticing the shape of conversations that I'm able to have at senior levels of leadership in organizations is definitely shifting.
Mm.
And what people are open to talk about in terms of well-being, their own relationship to themselves and the work they're doing, um, I have noticed that is definitely breaking open. And I don't know whether that's a kind of collective consciousness. We're starting to realize we need another place to look. And the place isn't outside, the place is inside. If if we're wanting to shape reality, then we need to change how we're showing up in that. Um, and I don't know whether it's that I found the language to access, or people trust me more to open up on those subjects. Um, but certainly the nature of my coaching conversations are much more around personal and perhaps even spiritual, and they feel more therapeutic, and have done for a lot of years, to be fair.
Yeah, yeah. And it's
But you can only do that when you're ready yourself. So anybody listening that's thinking, oh, I'm still talking about how to run teams and how to be effective and how to, don't do this until you've done it 5 levels down
yeah,
yourself. Don't think, oh, I'm going to start talking about the ego and spirituality. And be careful, because
yeah,
this is what I mean about you show up. It's from you.
yeah. It's not a bolt on.
No, no, no,
You
no,
need
no.
to come from a basic foundational place of having done the work yourself in order to approach that for others. That you
Yeah,
can only I can't remember where it initially came, but essentially that you're only able to take clients to places that you've already been your own version
yeah.
yourself, and are able to again about this confidence and centeredness, stand in that place of holding them safely there, I guess, in some
Yes,
respects.
yes. And there's a really obvious egoic trap in that, which is, oh, I've gone and done all this interesting stuff. Let me tell you about it. Um, because that's completely the reverse of what I'm alluding to. It's you bring your whole self to the conversation, yes, but it's whatever you're drawing forth from all of your journey it could be the smallest minute element of that, just a word, just a gesture, just a phrase that gives somebody some resonance of understanding that says, ah, right, yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So an example would be, I did a chemistry meeting with a very senior partner, a very large organization recently, and I used the word spiritual journey when I was talking about retirement, and it completely resonated with him, and he was very comfortable to go in that. And from everything else I was saying, that's what he wanted to talk about.
Mm.
and and that was unusual, but I've no doubt that's why he wanted to work with me, because he knew that was an access point for a conversation.
Yeah, fascinating. I'm mindful of time and us coming towards the final part, and I noticed that we haven't spoken about your fiction writing and your novels for young adults, and I'd love to hear how that has been part of your practice, and yeah, a little more about what need that meets for you, or yeah, how that sort of folds
Yeah.
into your primary practice of being a writer.
Yeah. It really does. And it's a complete labor of love. So my first book is called Magic to Memphis, and it's has a subtitle on it which is What if your life is working from the inside out? And you'll get from that um, what I aspired to do with it, and I think I've done a fair job, is to put these ideas of how life is working. How if you're angry and hostile, then you're going to show up. You're going to see conflict in your environment.
Yeah.
Um, or if you are somebody that is consistently rigid to change or resistant to change, you're going to see little change happening. So, Magic to Memphis is about a young teenage runaway living rough in a trailer in the Midwest of America with just a pit bull terrier for company. She's a very talented musician. She's estranged from her alcoholic mother and younger sister. She wants to go on a music quest to try and win it big and make it big in a music contest in Memphis, which is why it's called Magic to Memphis. Because on her way she meets this kind of shapeshifter traveler um, called Finch, who offers her the idea that her world might be working from the inside out, so that the reason things weren't working out for her, so she loses her job in the record store, she gets kicked out of the band, the trailer burns down, it all sorts of gets worse before it gets better, there's some life lessons she needs to start to learn, to let people in, to ask for help, to take off. She's a tough battler. She's an
Mm.
outlaw. She's called Jessie. She's an outlaw archetype. That when she kind of puts down the guns or puts down, takes off the gloves, um, that life can start to step forward and help. So it is a book where there's a story. There's the kind of this thrilling quest to Memphis and this whole dark character that's chasing her for something that she's got. Um, but there's also kind of parable about this coming of age story that says she gets some realizations along the way, if you like.
Mm.
Um, so that was my first one, and it was an absolute delight to write, and it took me a long time to write. Probably took 7 or 8 years because I was so busy in the business to write it, but I was determined to get that out. And then earlier this year I released another book called Truth Keeper, and Truth Keeper is book one of a trilogy, and it's based in the UK this time, and it's about a young girl that's been put in the care system. She thinks her parents are dead. They're not dead. She's been put there. She's been put in a children's home to keep her safe, because she's the last in a long line of truth keepers. So when she and this is 1,000 years old. This is, going back to biblical times. There's been these truth keepers, and that when she comes of age, when she becomes 18, she will inherit the ability to know the truth in any moment. And that then starts to become, as you might guess, that starts to become against the guardians of the truth and the suppressors of the truth, being the Illuminati historically. And so it's again a thrilling tale that starts to point at these truths of life. What is true about the world and about life, and how can we know that? So yeah, as you can see, get me started about my creative writing, and you won't stop me. We could be here another 2 hours.
Yeah, yeah. And I noticed that it's got, at least as I interpret it, great alignment with your approach, that like the underpinning of your approach to coaching as relates to how
Okay.
we look at the nature of reality and the
Yes.
unseen aspects of ourselves and how we might access them, how we can operate in the world more effectively through understanding what's been sort of preloaded into our way of being and unpacking that.
Yes. Completely. That's completely the link.
Yeah.
It's me loving to write, loving to create characters, loving the craft of writing, and wanting to express these ideas in a format and they're crossover books. So they're the protagonist in them is a teenager, which positions them as young adult, but they're what's called crossover, which means adults read them because they're written in an adult voice. You know, the adults can read them just as well as kids.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's all a way of just sharing these ideas and this inquiry into the nature of reality.
And I wonder, the other thing that comes up for me is, along with like all of these elements of your professional practice as regards your one-to-one coaching work, running the company and leading a team of coaches that are working in organizations, being an author of fiction for young adults, like how do you and spending a good amount of time on self-inquiry discovery, how do you um how do you stay grounded from a health perspective? One of the things that comes up as relating to coaches building businesses and recognizing that even if the sole practice they're focused on is one-to-one coaching, there are so many other aspects, them staying happy and healthy in themselves. I wonder, beyond meditation, what else is important to you? Any sort of approaches or tactics you take that it would be useful to
Um,
talk about?
Yeah, absolutely. So staying healthy, well-being is a big part of my life and what I do, simply because I derailed around 7 or 8 years ago when it all came to a crashing halt. And I was burned out. I got sick with a really horrible virus that I didn't realize I'd had for years, but I was in a chronic state with it, and it had basically taken out my immune system, and ended up not being able to get out of a chair and realizing something's wrong. And been going to the doctors for years saying I don't feel well, I'm tired, I've got this fatigue thing. Ended up in with private doctors in Harley Street and stuff to figure out what was wrong. But what was immediately wrong when I started to have all these functional nutrition tests where they talk about your toxicity and your mineral levels and your vitamin deficiencies and your detoxification pathways and all of that whole functional medicine realm. I realized I was completely burned out,
Mm,
and I had not got away with it because the body will always have the last word, and had
mm,
to take a year out of work, and didn't re- and thought and had to take the decision to take a year out of work knowing that I might not have a business to come back to at the end of that, and somehow I did.
mm,
Well, I did. Um, but yeah, so because of that, I am now in a very different frame of mind about that, which is I know I need to make my health important, and I know so I don't start work before 10 o'clock in the morning, which people will be listening to thinking, "What really? I start at 8." And well,
mm,
I used to start at 8, and then I got burnt out. My body had the last word. It took me out for a year, and now I realize I don't survive. And if I don't get my sleep, if I don't, I hardly drink. I eat as much organic food as I can, and I don't eat processed foods or garbage and it isn't that I don't have the odd bar of chocolate
mm.
and gin and tonic every now and then, because I absolutely do. But in contrast to a lot of people around me, and it's when you get into more broader social circles, you realize you have taken a different set of choices with health, because
Yeah.
um, I have so many principles about what I will eat and what I won't eat, what time I'll eat on a day, and it is all that really boring stuff, that health stuff. Um, I wear an aura ring that monitors steps, sleep, deep sleep, REM sleep, stress levels, all of that stuff. It is so normal to me that it isn't until I get into other types of like I went on something on Saturday with a bunch of girlfriends. It was 11 o'clock in the morning, and they were all bursting out bottles of prosecco and saying, "Does anybody?" And I don't even know how to respond. There was like
Yes.
nothing on the table I could drink. It's like, have you got this? We've got water. And I was like, is it tap water? You're like, yeah, I know I can't eat tap water. I can't drink tap water. So I'm fine. So yeah, health is something that I can only say for everybody that, listening, you learn this for yourself. You don't, or you pay the price. And
Yeah.
I paid the price. So I'm not and I'm still on a a healing path. I still have routines and protocols and supplementation stuff and all that good stuff. So I'm quite informed about that topic. But that has because I was so sick. I was
Mm.
so poorly. I was literally bedridden. And it wasn't a good time in my life anyway. So yeah, I was had this house of cards, and it just all got swept away in the most wonderful way that life does.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it like it strikes me certainly from some of the things that come up in some of the work I do, and certainly some of my direct experiences, that this approach to the edges of what we're capable of sustaining is happening for more and more people, and that our capacity to, even with people that are adept at self-inquiry and paying
Mm,
attention and
mm.
listening, our capacity to really hear what our bodies are saying is, for many, diminished, or we've learned to kind of move
Completely. We're
past,
disconnected.
yeah,
Yeah,
what's going
completely.
on.
And I was kidding I'm a mind type. I was just kidding myself that the mind is incredibly powerful at keeping us going when the body is flatlined, when the body says no more, I can't do it. My adrenals are flayed. I'm toxic. I have
Mm,
no more energy left in the tanks. I have no immune system. My gut health is gone.
mm,
And yet the mind will still go, yeah, but it's only 9:30. If I just do this till 11 o'clock tonight, I'll just know, or I'll just start on Saturday, Sunday afternoon and get ahead on the week. All those ways we negotiate. We're not negotiating with anybody. We're negotiating with madness. It makes no sense. But the madness is anybody listening. You'll do what you'll do until your body has the last word, and
yeah,
that's
yeah.
kind of it. But there is an egoic trap with, and I will just make this point because it's important for coaches. There's an egoic trap with coaching, that it's sort of a service industry. So we're
Mm,
doing it for other people. So we feel like we're doing something good and worthwhile, which is a huge egoic trap, and it becomes more worthy or something like that. And when you're doing this worthy thing and you're building a business around this worthy thing, and then you're perhaps running kids to family, trying to keep other people happy, quite often the people that come in are good people that want to make other people happy, which is a lovely selfless thing to do, but completely redundant when you're going down for the third time and you've got no oxygen left in your tank. um you have to look after yourself first. You are your own responsibility first, because you haven't you haven't got anything, this mind body vessel, that is the thing you're taking to work. So look after it, because that's the ultimate tool of your trade, is being able to show up, get up, show up, and be fabulous on the day.
yeah,
And you've got to feel good to do. You've got to feel physically good to do that. And even just basic things like sleep. How much people negotiate on sleep in
yeah,
order to keep. I'll stay up watching TV with my partner because I haven't seen my partner very much, and so it will get to 11:30 when realize I've got a busy. I should have been in bed at 9:30.
yeah.
And all of that negotiation, but it's just an hour, but it's just this, it's just another. It's not.
No, absolutely. The importance of showing up for ourselves in order that we can then
Serve
perhaps
others, yeah.
show up for others. Yeah.
Yeah, completely.
And as we
Completely.
move into these last few minutes of our conversation, I'm conscious that I've largely guided what we've been talking about through my questions, and seeking to frankly take advantage of having this time with you, and ask all the things I wanted to ask. I wonder if there's anything that we haven't covered that you would really like to talk about, or share or state
Mm.
in these last few minutes.
I guess what's missing for me is just to acknowledge to anybody listening, um, we are going through times of incredible change, and and that's become a cliche in itself. And there can be a tendency to look at the world as it is, with all of the conflict, with all of the tech, with the gig economy, with the pace and the rate, and trying to keep up with all of that. They can be overwhelmed just simply trying to read the world and trying to understand and navigate our part within that, and how do we create happiness, success, fulfillment when we have such conflict. There's wars, there's viruses, there's, potentially Armageddon just around the corner. I think it can be really daunting, I think, in this time of turbulence for anybody. And to kind of come full circle back is the world works from the inside out. So and it comes from the point you made about stay within your circle of influence. Build your own ability to be happy, successful, and fulfilled. Equip yourself to be resourceful and resilient. Learn and grow in ways that are healthy and meaningful to you, and find pathways through that make sense to you, rather than being seduced by the aspirations of other people, or what we see on TikTok or Insta or any of those things. The world is desperate and clamoring for our attention, to tell us how we should be living our life, what we should look like, what we should sound like, what success should be, how much we should be in. And it's a really it can be a really confusing, conflicting time, I think. And my encouragement for any of us in this profession of coaching is to remember we're strong when we are strong. We're powerful when we've built that within ourselves. We're the most impactful when we've done the work to serve ourselves first. And no matter what's been said during this discussion, there will have been points of resonance for somebody listening to think, that's something I could attend to. And it could be something you already know, something you have kind of heard about and got more interested in. But from all this conversation, throw the whole lot away, apart from those one or two points that just landed with you, because there can be a tendency with anything to think, oh, I need to know all about all of this. I need to know more about all of this, or I need to do all of it. You don't, because that's where overwhelm comes from. That's me reading too many books and thinking I needed to know everything that everybody was saying. Just look at your own situation, look at your own aspirations, and find those 2 or 3 points that are going to strengthen you as an individual, that are going to bolster your sense of well-being and happiness and fulfillment. And just leave the rest as kind of flotsam and jetsam on the ocean of life.
Wow, what a wonderful sentiment to finish on. So we have the links for your various websites. So we've got Star Coaching, Learn Star, and then your YouTube site. They will be in the show notes for the episodes, and we'll put links to your books also. And
thank you.
All that really remains for me is to say an enormous thank you for both taking this time and sharing of yourself and your thoughts on coaching. It's been a real pleasure.
I've loved it. I've loved hanging out with you, Neil. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, Julie.